interconnection process. In each country, you have your own rules, but they may take 2-3 years for interconnection studies to come back for each project. And this is not even talking about the land side. The land, some of our projects we have to deal with 25 landowners. 25 different landowners you have to negotiate to build the wind, to build the solar. So that doesn't allow for scalability. So today there's more demand. Any project I have, I can sell because there's so much corporate demand. But the projects are not moving fast enough. So what we need for each country is streamlined rules for permitting and for interconnection. What are the streamlined rules that will align and make the process way faster? Make the process 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years. And each country has to formulate their own because they have their own restrictions. But without that, I think we'll never get to the scale we need.
Commissioner, is it the same in Africa?
Yes, it is it is the same to some extent, but I wanted to answer your question very directly about what is the best accelerator. The best accelerator is the crisis. I think the pressure is so much on everyone, whether you are a politician, whether you are a private sector, whether you are a bank, to ensure that this is happening and very, very fast. In everyone's priority, the first thing is energy security. And the best energy security we could have are twofold. One is renewables. It's everywhere. For us in Africa, we are endowed, so it's throughout the continent. It's available everywhere in all its forms. And the second, also untapped resource, is what His Excellency started with, is efficiency. And efficiency is the greenest of energy. Through Africa, the African Commission for Energy, Southern Africa could save like the equivalent of $9 billion through the program that we have put in place just from energy efficiency. We are substituting the grid into smart grids throughout the continent because the wastage is about 20 to 40% from that. And nothing can be done without digital meters, without smart data, very timely, and this is why we're doing the work that we're doing in terms of the information system for energy. But going back to your question and also linking it up what was said earlier about the fringes, the microgrids, I would like us please to be careful about that. Africa's ambition, and now more than ever, has never been to put a light bulb in a hut. This is not the ambition. This could be maybe for a remote village or for a small community, but the scale we are talking about here, and it was mentioned here, we're talking about massive investments in renewable projects in order to generate also other forms of fuels that are very much needed as we speak. And now that I don't want to delve into green hydrogen, but Africa now is poised and is preparing for the production of 5,000 million tons of green hydrogen every year, and this will not come from microgrids. So that's why the massive renewable energy in solar, or like in Northern Africa, and then even in geothermal in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, is coming, from massive investments in renewables. There is no solution fit all. It depends what purpose that you are building for. But microgrids, that's fine. Yeah, please keep doing that. But knowing that this is not also what is at the core of our interest and concern now. We want energy at scale for the continent. We want energy security. We want to use it also to produce other forms of fuel as we speak. And it is being done as we speak, actually, as well, in this very country. So this is what the other aspect, and I'll go back to the integration. Creating an integrated market like we're seeing in Europe and what Ireland is doing to do, we are doing the same thing in Africa. We launched that last year, a single African electricity market. It's a very ambitious program, not just a project, linking generation to transmission to harmonize policies, regulation, to be Operation 2040, and I dare say even before 2040, even the crisis that we are living. So here, I think we have to understand that the potential within Africa is huge. The resources are available abundantly, and climate finance, green finance is in trillions around the world. We just want 2 or 3%. We'll bridge the gap in no time. And Africa has demonstrated that even within the last few months, during this crisis, we jumped into the occasion. We rode the wave, and we are into productions. 8 countries producing green hydrogen, 4 producing sustainable aviation fuel. So we're moving forward. We have to do that fast and at scale. Thank you.
Thanks. Claudio, do you want to comment on anything Commissioner said?
Absolutely, and it's good that you bring up the point. You know, microgrids it's a technology that it's also needed and deployed in developed economies and in markets like in Europe and so on. The point is simply that any technology that is available today to help decarbonizing the system needs to be deployed. We cannot be selective on that, and there is times where it's better to work at the edge first, to get access to electricity, while then working on planning, permitting, and so on to build the infrastructure behind. What I think it's an opportunity for all of us is that we have gone through a lot of those learnings in Europe, in other parts of the world. Minister mentioned quite well a number of challenges that the entire energy system needs to deal with because of this increased complexity, the stability topics, and in order to address that, there is flexibility that you need to inject in the system. Flexibility comes from, managing at the edge demand response. Flexibility comes from interconnections that he was also mentioning. And one last point, it is a more complex system that we need to deal with, but technology is there. There is no concern about securing that future energy system that will be electrified across the sectors with clean energy sourcing will deliver even better resiliency, even better availability and affordability. If we do it approaching with innovation also on the way we collaborate, the way we chip in with financing, the way we understand that investing in decarbonizing the infrastructure in Africa, it's way cheaper than doing the last bit in parts of Europe, for instance. So there is a lot that we all need to contribute, and I like very much the example Leo brought up, where creating scale and proposing solutions to in this case, companies, and that can work also for countries in Africa.
Thank you. Minister, is there, I liked what the Commissioner was talking about, that the energy crisis is the great accelerator for the clean energy transition. Do you find that that's the case in Ireland, or is there anything else that you want to comment on?
I think it is in Europe, but can I pick up what the Commissioner said on 2 things? Firstly, I think that idea, vision of an African single electricity market is very powerful. I wish in Europe that we had a single electricity market. We do in name, but in working functional system. So we all have to work together on this, and Africa might be able to take a jump. But also, I think I heard you saying earlier on about the cost of interest rates for capital. This is a big capital investment transition. It's all upfront. The marginal cost of the fuel is 0, but the capital cost is high. And bringing down the capital cost is absolutely critical. There are various elements to that. Firstly, to go back to the negotiations, as I mentioned earlier, I think it was, the Prime Minister for Barbados saying at the start of the week that the developing world is paying 14%, the developed world less than 4%. That's a first fundamental thing we need to address. And I think that's true what the Maldives are saying. We need a mosaic of climate finance solutions. Yes, we need all sorts of funding arrangements for loss and damage, but we also need reform of the MDBs, of the financial capital markets, so that the capital cost for Africa and other developing countries come down, first and foremost. But also then within that, I was speaking to Mary Robinson the other day, our great former president who fights for climate justice, and she makes the point that a lot of countries, these big mega renewables projects, run the risk of losing local communities. And we do need to make sure that we approach this in a just transition way where there is benefit to local communities, there's respect for local agriculture and local biodiversity. And I think if we get that right, it will be much easier to streamline the permitting system. And we do need to streamline and speed up the permitting system. And the highest cost of interest rates in many instances is the political risk, planning risk, environmental risk behind projects. So when you work with nature, with local communities in the permitting, that is one of the important ways of us being able to streamline the permitting system as a way of bringing down the capital cost. We need to do it globally at events like this and locally in working with local communities and governments.
That is such an important point. That is bringing in people and communities to the transition to help accelerate the permitting, but also to ensure that the transition really is in the direction of just, and that we're aligning the just transition along with the climate ambitions, along with energy security. And we're at the close of time, but I do want to give each of you 30 seconds each to just share with the audience what's the key accelerator for you in your perspective, from your business or from where you're sitting in government?
No, you should give it to you.
So I'm with the private sector. So I think this for us is the group of regulations and streamlining the process so we can deploy renewables at scale. Just as a note on scale, right? The U.S. today has 700 gigawatts of thermal projects. We'll need 3,000 gigawatts of renewables to be built. We're building 30 a year. So that would mean 100 years to get to the end of this journey. That gives you an idea on what needs to be done to to go from where we are today to where we have to be.
Thank you. You were not here, Minister, but I said we created the instrument to de-risk the projects, to ensure their bankability, to ensure their attractiveness to the private sector. We launched that last week. We are eager to continue our massively and fast scaling up access to electricity everywhere in the continent and to all Africans, and there is no one solution that fits all. We have diverse countries, and within each country there are diverse communities, and we are taking all of the solutions. We are not stopping at anything, and we are tailoring the technology and the solutions to our needs and communities. Having said that, Africa is poised to be, and it is already, but it's poised to be the largest continent in terms of production of renewables and for domestic use, I mean, within the continent, but also for export, this and fuel. So if you're an investor, if you're a technology manufacturer, this is the time to be in Africa now.
Thank you. From my side, just to conclude, I think we have a good initiative at the WEF, and Krista, you've been working hard on this. Is to have a system value approach and build a framework around that. It is important for all of us. There is no way that we can solve this scaling, as Leo was mentioning, on the traditional model. We do our part as technology providers. Government does their part as policies and so on. We have to work across. We have to be able, each and every one of us, to understand the full system perspective. And then there are frameworks that will help in taking into account what is the best priority, what is the best return for the investment, and of course making sure that everyone is involved in this transition.
Yeah, no, Leo reminds me that the scale of the increase we need in all our countries is beyond compare. People don't understand how big, if we're to meet our targets, and it's very much the supply chain, and it's in cables, in turbines, smart meters, electrolyzers. It's and this technology is all developed. We're not waiting for some new technological development, but how we scale up the industrial production of those basic components of the new industrial revolution is the real challenge. And as Nicholas Stern says, we need to go from billions now to trillions in that approach. And that will bring down the cost. It'll be a virtuous loop. As we scale up, the price becomes better and better. But the scale of the scaling up, people should not need to be honest about it. It is a leap we need to make.
I would like to thank our panel. Thank you so much for sharing with our audience the magnitude of the challenge, but also that real actions are being taken to get there. And that's really inspiring. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to our audience. Have a great day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for those in person joining us. Thank you those who are joining us digitally as well. My name is Sophia Lee. I am a journalist, and I will be moderating this panel today. This panel, we will be chatting about unlocking joint business action on air pollution and climate change. Okay, so to start, I think we should hear a little bit about statistics concerning air pollution. 99% of the world's population live in places where air pollution levels exceed World Health Organization guideline limits. Nearly 7 million people die prematurely every year due to air pollution. So, action is urgently needed now, not in 10 or 20 years. It's impacting us now. So what do we do about it? Well, last year at COP26, the Alliance for Clean Air was launched, and the Alliance for Clean Air brings together business leaders committed to tackling air pollution by measuring and reducing value chain air pollutant emissions, investing in innovation, and working with policymakers and peers to champion the climate benefits of tackling air pollution. Here are some of the announcements that came this week at COP27. The new members, EY, GEA Group, GlaxoSmithKline, Haleon, Moderna, and Oracle, welcome to the new members. They introduced a first-of-its-kind guide for businesses to measure air pollutant emissions across value chains. And the guide was created by IKEA Group, Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and the Stockholm Environment Institute. Lastly, a new business action toolkit is available in partnership with Accenture and the Clean Air Fund. This session, we will highlight the ways in which business action can contribute to the climate, health, and other benefits of improving air quality, review the state of play for corporate action, challenges, lessons learned, and ways to increase adaptation of value chain air pollutant emission measuring. And we'll also highlight the Alliance for Clean Air progress and what members will be doing after COP27 leading up to COP28. All right, let's get this panel started. Hello, everyone. I believe Andreas will be joining us as well. I'm just going to quickly introduce our panelists. We have Andreas. He is the head of climate at IKEA Group. Hello, Andreas. Welcome.
Hi, nice to see you all.
We have Rob here, the managing partner of sustainability of EY. Hi, Rob.
Mahaba.
We have Martina, head secretariat of Climate and Clean Air Coalition.
Hello. Nice to be here with you.
And of course, we have Tulu, director of Global Diet and Activity Research Group and Network of NRC Epidemiology, University of Cambridge, and founder of Urban Better. Woo!
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with Andreas. Can you hear me, Andreas? Okay, amazing.
Loud and clear.
So, Andreas, why is failing to capture and measure progress on air pollution such a missed opportunity if you're not already doing it?
I think you were on it direct already in your opening speech as well. But we know that 2.4 billion people are suffering from or exposed to dangerous levels of air pollution, and we have 7 million premature deaths every year. Recent studies also show that even low levels of air pollutant is dangerous to health. So, I mean, this is a huge human rights issue, the access to clean air, but people don't have that access. And at the same time, we also know that the existing reporting that we're doing for greenhouse gas reporting to look into what is our impact on climate change, all of that point we have today, we have the data available to also quantify how much air pollution we generate by the energy we source, farming practices, product end of life, etc. So with this new standard that we launched last week, we empower all companies to, through existing greenhouse gas reporting, also quantify air pollution so we can take joint action on limiting both climate change and enabling people to get access to clean air.
Thank you, Andreas. And also, because you're one of the founding members, and what is the most interesting thing that you learned in making progress towards your commitment on understanding air pollution emissions?
I would say the main learning is that we actually managed. We set out an ambition a year ago. We had a draft standard, and we wanted to actually have a simple standard that didn't add so much workload for companies, so that they, through existing reporting and greenhouse gas reporting, could also quantify air pollutants. And we are the 10 founding members of Alliance, together with Stockholm Environmental Institute. We have piloted and washed it and developed the standard, and it works. We have the tool and guidance now in place to really enable all companies, regardless of sector, to quantify their air pollutants. And I think that is a huge learning and something that makes me really proud that we managed as a team. What we also saw when we set and established our air pollution inventory was also the contribution from the existing actions we are taking to limit our impact on climate change, how much it contributes to limiting and reducing air pollutants, such as electrifying vehicles, sourcing renewable electricity, phasing out coal, striving to recycling of our products instead of them ending up on landfill. The contributions are huge. So what we're all already doing has a big impact to enable people to access clean air. And where we now will do is to analyze this to take even further action to reduce air pollution.
And lastly, Andreas, I want to quickly understand for those who are here who are not familiar with the guide. Can you just give us a quick intro to this guide and why it's so important to tackling air pollutants?
Sure thing. Now, so before I explain the guide, many might think like, oh, is this just another guide and another topic to add to your plate? And that is very important from us. I feel the pain of all over my peers of how it is to add more topics to your plate, but we wanted a simple guide based on existing greenhouse gas reporting. So what it really helps is through existing data you have to quantify what is the air pollution coming from, say, sourcing of electricity, combustion of fuel for, say, heating, as well as for transports, through the material sourcing you are using, as well as product end of life and agriculture management practices. So based on how your value chain looks like, what is your activities, or business travel, production, transport, etc., you get a clear guidance from this guide on how to take that existing greenhouse gas report and also be able to quantify air pollution for each of the different parts of the value chain. So materials, production, transport, stores, as we have for IKEA, customer travel, use at home, and end of life. So it really creates that whole air pollution inventory for a total value chain of a company. And it also helps them to take joint action on addressing both climate action and reducing air pollution.
Thank you so much, Andreas. It's a roadmap for businesses and customers alike. Thank you so much, Andreas, for joining us. Okay, Rob. Rob, can you tell us why EY has decided to take an integrated approach to both tackling climate health and air pollutants?
Yeah, of course. And we have taken a pretty aggressive stance from a net zero perspective. So we set up a target, a 2025 net zero target as a firm globally. And we're well on track to delivering on that. But the biggest impact for our own business, we're a people business. We employ 350,000 people across 180 countries. The majority of those people live and work in urban areas. So air pollution has a massive impact on our workforce and our extended workforce. And I think some of the metrics you picked up before, but another one that sticks to mind is over 100 billion is the cost of absenteeism in work due to air pollution. And it's not just people not being able to come into work, it's actually the other impacts of people looking after their families. They might be looking after ill children, sick children with asthma and so forth. So for us, it's an imperative, a commercial imperative for our business. So not only is it the right thing to do, I think as a major global corporate, you have a responsibility to lead on these things, but there's a commercial angle to it as well. We have to look after our people. And our people are living in environments that are not always, as healthy as they need to be and as they should be.
Sorry, just to clarify, 100 billion people miss out on work.
Sorry, $100 billion
Oh, $100
is the
billion.
cost. $100 billion
There's no-
global economy for people not coming into work through illness driven by poor air quality.
Yeah, I was like, that's impossible. We just reached 8 billion in population yesterday.
Yesterday, that's right.
Yeah, so I was like, huh. Okay.
It's growing quickly,
Yes.
the population.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Martina, as with Climate and Clean Air Coalition, you work a lot with government. So how can bold government policies and private sector leadership reinforce each other?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, we have had experience over the past 10 years in connecting climate and clean air as the two agendas, we now call them the lethal duo, the deadly duo, because they're mutually reinforcing each other on top of everything else. And we've had experience with working with governments on the policies, on national planning, and putting into place the policies that work on that, and providing the arguments from both sides. So coming with a strong health and clean air argument to the table, and at the same time looking at how that could also have benefits for climate and vice versa. So whoever is interested in which kind of topic can be brought to the table. And the topics that we look at are not so different if we look at the private sector. So the areas that we look at, and we just heard from Andreas quite a run through of the topics. So I think there's quite a way to bring this experience to the private sector, and that's what we've done as well with this guide. But what can the public sector do? It's number one about setting targets, giving a very clear direction of travel for the private sector with that. And obviously here at the COP, we talk a lot about the national determined contributions, including clean air and health-related targets into that is really important. The second is about setting a level playing field, the right policies that enable the creativity of the private sector. So not being totally prescriptive, but being more performance-based to unleash and unlock the innovative power of the private sector. And the third is about a process of co-creation. And we've seen that in the past as well. It's been very powerful, where businesses and government were coming together, looking together at the methodologies, at the roadmaps, at the policies, to actually have these stretch goals embedded. So it's doable, but we also put the goalpost every time a little further out to make sure we actually get to something that's mutually reinforcing.
Thank you, Martina. Well, I want to deep dive this in a little bit. Tulu, as an epidemiologist, can you share some of the alarming research that you have seen on the ground?
So, alarming. It's a lot of pressure. Don't know how alarmable these people are. So I think the case has been made. We set the scene with the three panelists so far. I do think it's really critical to recognize the reason why we're talking about air pollution is it really is one of the lowest hanging fruit, both for health and climate action. So I can think about four ways of thinking about it in terms of health, in terms of the economy, in terms of climate, in terms of ecosystems, right? So in terms of health, it's probably more well known about the impacts of air pollution on things like increasing risk of asthma, of the more respiratory illnesses, but probably less well known is that air pollution is a significant contributor to the rise of things like strokes that we're seeing. It's things like heart attacks. There's some research done in the US during the first lockdown of the pandemic, and which they showed that in the cities, because obviously there were extreme lockdowns and everything stopped, not feasible going forwards, but as a proof of concept, really powerful. They found that in the cities that had there's really stringent measures that cut down air pollution drastically. Over a 4-month period, 4 months, they saw the significant declines in heart attacks. So we're not talking about some massive, in the next 40 years it might improve our health. This is something that we can tangibly improve now. From a climate warming perspective, I should just say, the additional aspect that people sometimes find really striking in terms of air pollution is the impact on cognitive development at the extremes of age. We know for older populations, air pollution and dementia, there's an association there. Really alarmingly, connection with in young people and cognitive development. So we found that air pollution impacts the drops in performance IQ in children. And that impact is even higher in children living in high in households with high deprivation levels. So when we talk about whether or not we can afford to, this is what we should bear in mind. Are we generating a next generation where we're essentially handicapping and decreasing their chances of positively contributing to development? So a lot of my work is in cities across Africa, and we talk about the young population as the youngest continent, the median age of 19, 65% of people under 25, and we talk about this potential. In order to harness that population, we need a healthy population. If we're talking about development, the previous session. So that's one. Economy we're talking about. You've mentioned a little bit. In one city, if you look at a city like Accra in Ghana, in 1 year, the impact of air pollution, it lost over 3% of its GDP in 1 year. Just giving you context here. Climate change, we can significant drops in air pollution can really can contribute to slowing by almost 0.6%. We're talking about Paris Climate Agreement, 1.5%. 0.6% of that by 2050 can be tackled with air pollution, right? And lastly, because it's Biodiversity Day today, right? Ecosystems, we often don't think about this. The nitrogen and sulfur deposits in our natural ecosystems and the impact of air pollution on our ecosystems and really impacting our biodiversity, which impacts on a whole host of other things, including our pipeline for medicines, all of these things. So when we talk about air pollution, and now, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. And we know measurement works. Right? I'll end with this because this is a really powerful. There was a study that was done looking at, so over the last few years, the US embassies globally have been installing monitors across the world, right? And they found that in cities where the air pollution data was measured and tweeted regularly, saw significant drops in two things. Saw significant drops in air pollution. So that speaks to, okay, we don't know exactly why, but potentially there is a pressure, right? And I think this comes down to the power of leveraging the private sector to be part of that measurement, and because that has the potential to really pressure. And interestingly, they also found in the embassies drops in their hazard pay. Right, in the staff that worked in those cities that had the drops in air pollution. So you can kind of see how there's the pressure and actually in the very short term dropping air pollution, but also the benefit for organizations who have employees working in their cities in a very short space of time.
Wow, thank you so much. Do you actually have any health cost numbers of, you were saying, it's not just asthma, heart attacks, strokes. What does that look like for the individual in terms of health insurance, health costs?
Well, it's different in different cities, right? So the example I was giving in terms of loss of GDP was really around loss of productivity. So when I say in a city like Lagos in Nigeria, there's a city of over 20, depending on who you speak to, 22 to 29 million people. You know, we're not talking chicken change here. The cost of that is over 3 billion, right? In terms of loss, so there's over almost 3% of its GDP.
Wow.
Is lost in the health impact of air pollution, just air pollution. In
just
a year.
Air pollution over 3 billion in one city.
In 1 year.
Wow. Okay, Rob, why do businesses have such a unique role in taking responsibility and addressing air pollution and moving forward with it, whether or not local policy moves forward?
Well, I think you probably just heard it there from Tolu talking about, 3% of GDP. It's phenomenal, isn't it? So, I think, and this is where measurement is so important, but it's almost to your question as well. It's how do you interpret the measurement of air quality into commercial impact? Because that's really what helps, I think, gets the attention of the businesses who are doing a lot of this polluting into the air, is how can you turn measurement of pollution into value. to really get them to wake up to and understand the implications of their contribution towards something which is actually harming their business. It's not a direct link, so you have to work to make the link. So we have to make the link between what's happening with the air pollution locally and then the impact you're having on not being able to attract the right talent, not being able to retain the right talent, not being able to get the productivity that you're expecting from your manufacturing sites. You have to work quite hard to make the link. And I think that's what's so positive about this movement. One of the reasons we've signed up and one of our roles beyond our own business is sort of helping other businesses make that linkage and really can make the commercial case for action.
Okay, making those connections with data. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, is that we also know today there's a new business action toolkit being launched to help companies make this case. This is now live on the Alliance for Clean Air website. So, Andreas, if you could still hear me, Andreas, for companies considering joining the Alliance, what are a few things they should consider?
I think the first thing when considering to join is maybe the company might have a feeling that is this, once again, this is just another topic on the plate. And I really want to confirm that our ambition and what we have succeeded with is a very simple standard as well. It builds on existing greenhouse gas reporting. So this is really a way with existing measures to address both agendas at the same time. So the key is to take that fear away. And then from joining in, I think it's good also to have one person in place within the company to keep it together. So even if it's about an integration into existing things, it's good to have a key account or a key project leader as well. But what's also really good is that if you're joining, you also not only will have a simple standard, there's also great support within the alliance as well. So from Stockholm Environment Institute, we get really hands-on support, how to actually convert the greenhouse gas reporting and actually get the air pollution reporting going as well. That support has been invaluable, to say the least. Then you also have the support from the other members as well. I mean, we are all in the same situation and we're here to support each other and act on guidance and advice as well. So I would say if it's something to just have a signal to send to other companies thinking about joining, it is a simple guidance and you're not alone, and let's do this together and really make it a reality that we, as clear as it's greenhouse gas reporting today, we also make air pollutant reporting a reality and what is a de facto thing for a company to do.
Thank you, Andreas. Rob, you're also part of the Alliance, and I wanted to ask, what are some of the key questions you and your team had to ask before signing on and joining?
I think the conceptually, it's quite an easy sell. So I don't think there are many organizations or corporates which would immediately say, we're not going to think about this and get involved in this. I think one of the challenges that picks up on what Andreas said around making sure that the measurement framework, making sure the commitments you're making are not too overly ambitious or above what you're already responsible for reporting on. So talk about corporates now that they are inundated with lots of different reporting frameworks. And so therefore the questions they typically get asked is, what's the additional sort of overhead of this? What am I actually signing up to? So conceptually, yes, but can I get into the detail of what that means? And maybe some nervousness around, well, but I operate in lots of different regions. Some areas we have good local government reporting and measurement. In some parts where I operate, maybe I don't have any. I don't want to sign up to something and then immediately be called out for missing. Yeah. So I think we've got to be really careful. And I think the pragmatic framework will always win. We need something really pragmatic and easy to implement. And we want to make sure that we don't let perfect be the end. So some progress here is better than no progress. We've got to encourage corporates to sign up with a view of going, even if we want to keep pushing them, but we want more signed up than those that aren't. So how do we make a framework and measurement that encourages that? And I think that's the key around how do you get companies on board. It's just getting them comfortable with what is it that we're actually signing up to, how will I be reported, how will I be assessed. If we can make that value case back to, again, but this is the value that's going to deliver to your business, I think we can do that. I think the framework's important, just to make sure it's not too difficult, too onerous to implement.
Maybe if I can come into that as well, because we've been working on this guide. We were there was a really good constellation because we were working on this guide while the alliance was coming together. So there was a virtuous cycle there as well, a good coincidence. And we had immediately a number of companies interested in testing. And I think that's really learning by doing as well. We wanted to be pragmatic, not making it too onerous in terms of adding something on top, making sure this could actually connect with the inventory work that's being done on the climate side as well. There's a lot of sources and solutions that actually do good on both sides again. So I think there's enough of a synergistic area that made it a good sell as well. And yeah, taking it forward bit by bit and to help the companies to see the size of the problem. And that was really, it becomes a management tool in the very first place, and that was important to us.
Martina, I also want to ask, how can we have more of a wake-up call and incorporate this into corporate agendas along with policy?
Yeah, I think we heard quite a bit already. Number one, it is building up this movement involving more people. And I think Tuludo said it very, very well. What it does do to give information, data to people, and now I'm talking about the sort of the air quality measurements out there, so that it becomes a concern for everybody. We heard it becomes a business concern at the same time, because that's all customers as well. It's not only customers, but it's also the workforce. So taking that into consideration, it's a moral imperative, obviously as well. Clean air should not be a luxury for the few, and I think we have to bring that home very forcefully. But it's also a problem that can be solved very easily, relatively quickly, with all these multiple benefits that we've seen. So it's about spinning the narrative in a right way, that it's not becoming something overwhelming, but it's a win-win-win situation all around. And I think that is also something. Yesterday evening, we had a climate and clean air ministerial with ministers from over 40 countries. And we did actually say we want to create a breathing time. It's time to breathe clean air flagship for 2024. That looks like far away, but we wanted to put that out there, but it needs a whole preparation. And I think if we have this kind of community coming together and creating that momentum, that would be a real step forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. So, Tulu, for those watching in the audience and virtually today, and they own a business, what's the most, you've already touched on a lot of statistics, but what's the most important thing for them to understand in tackling air pollutants and climate health for them as a business?
Yeah. So I actually want to pick up on a couple of points that you, a particular point you raised, Rob, about not adding onerous reporting, because, you know, we intuitively and through this conversation now think about air pollution and climate action. But for example, we did some research looking at trying to understand health co-benefits to climate mitigation actions. Right. Firstly, the first thing we found was that there's very little data because of measurement, because people are not actually looking at the measurement. But that's aside. When we looked at the data that did exist, there were three prominent pathways, one of which was air pollution. And that came out really strongly. So when you're thinking about your climate reporting around climate action, around sustainability, air pollution is a really tangible opportunity to integrate what you're already doing and saying, well, this is not just part of climate action, actually. We know, and there's evidence to show, that it is a health co-benefit and really critical that would be felt both near and far. So I think that really understanding that it's in that pathway between health and climate mitigation is really critical. The second thing I want to say, which maybe doesn't directly answer your question, but I want to tease out when we talk about business. You know, there's different sectors here, and there's different, depending on what you do, your role and your supply chain, and the opportunity to think about how through your supply chain you can tackle air pollution, which is how I would directly answer your question. But I would go one step further and to say that businesses in the financial capital space, right, where you're actually, it's indirect in that you are providing financing, be that funding, be that investment, be that other kind of financing of projects that shape the environment and that contribute to air pollution. So whether you're financing infrastructure projects and like roads, financing real estate and building new development, there is a potential in your participation of this kind of alliance to look at, well, to say your value chain would be to say, how can we exercise our influence in terms of how we leverage our capital towards incentivizing initiatives that consider and proactively tackle air pollution through the work that they do. So I think maybe we haven't teased out that indirect kind of influence that certain types of businesses and organizations can have, which I think could be really, really powerful, because we know a lot of our cities are being built by the private sector, right? The finances coming in to build cities are from largely private capital. So to what end can they actually be part of saying, we will invest in these kinds of initiatives that consider and measure air pollution and deliberately look for approaches to tackle that?
Yes, it's already happening. It's already baked in. So why not incorporate it? Andreas, I wanted to ask, where is the Alliance heading in the next year? And what are some key points that the Alliance want to focus on for this upcoming year?
I would say for the coming year, we have 3 pillars, I would say, that we focus on. I would say the number one is, of course, membership growth. Because the more members we have in the Alliance, of course, the more awareness we can actually create regarding the connection of climate and clean air. So that is key. It also helps us to actually also mobilize action as well. So the more members we have who set the air pollution inventory, set goals, and translate it into clear actions, we also have a more stronger contribution to reducing air pollution. The second point, or second pillar, it's inspiring other players. We know that there are other initiatives than the Alliance for Clean Air, which also contributes to clean air. I mean, there's with electrification of transportation, pushing for renewable energy, etc. So how can also the narrative of joining climate mitigation and air pollution also be joined, so we're more spokespersons for it? So we hope also to create a common narrative and a messaging in other initiatives as well. And the third part is also how we can influence different parts. To take one example as well, I mean, how can we make air pollution as mandatory in sustainability reporting as well? In the European Union, we know that in the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, there is requirements on the topics of pollution, and including air pollution as well. So, but there's no standard for it today. So can this be maybe the company standard for how to report on air pollution as well? So in short, it's membership growth, inspiring other players, and how do we also influence other stakeholders?
Thank you, Andreas. Okay, my final question to the panelists. What else can governments be doing to incite more aggressive climate action in consideration to air pollutants? Local policy, national policy?
I think, so obviously yes, so more policy, but I do think one thing we need more from the the public sector is more sharing of knowledge. So I think we've got certain geographies that have got air quality processes and measurement in place and have had it in place for quite some time. So we know how to do this. And what I'd like to see more is more sharing and proactive sharing of that. Now, one of the things we were talking about before we came on was, the role of the corporate sector in enabling that. So sort of almost dragging local governments, dragging them to the table, saying, we have to do this. We need it for our business. We need it for the community. Maybe we can fund it to get it going. But ultimately, we do want, and we want to leverage the experience we've got in the regions, the mature regions where we do this, and we do it really well.
Well, I started off with a couple of ideas, so let me spin that a little further. And one is how how we can use maybe the leverage from the local governments a little more. You just said, well, it's difficult to get them at the table. I think the local governments would tell you exactly the same story the other way around. So I think it is, where do we start providing the platform for doing things like that? And in the CCAC, we've been all built around bringing together the different constituency groups across the different sectors. We do have hubs in which we can actually discuss that. So peer-to-peer, I think, is extremely powerful to take that on. And maybe one step back as well. Private sector taking this on voluntarily, I think is really good because it's learning by doing, it's getting comfortable with all this. But I think the pressure is building up, and I just want to put it out there. If it's not being done, I think it will come in form of regulation and the standards and so on. And some of that may actually be really needed, but it's good to be ready for it as well. So I think there's this, that spiral that we've been talking about. And I just wanted to say, in the very year that the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution that made the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment a human right, we did see that 99% of we started off with that quote, right? The 99% figure of people breathing air that does not meet WHO standards. And I can see it coming. This gives standing to people as well because it's a human right. So I think I'd say there's a big carrot, but there's also a big stick out there.
Yeah, I think totally agree with that, Martina. I think I would nuance it even more and let's say, at the local government level. Then my experience in kind of doing this kind of partnership is that even within the spaces, there are people who are looking for this kind of partnership to help leverage, to say, we're trying to do that actually I'm trying to do that in my local government, trying to do that in my city, but actually I'm struggling because I'm hitting barriers. So I do think when we talk about local government, and we should, I've never come across a city where there isn't somebody who is actually trying to do something and is hitting a wall. So the potential for exactly what you're saying in sharing to actually be the force behind that person to say, listen, I'm not a lone voice in the wilderness saying this. Look at the business sector, the private sector are really wanting this. And actually, if we really want them to be, so I think that finding those champions, and that's the power of the coalition. This is alliance from the private sector, but to some extent that kind of coalition also exists or should exist in the public sector, of finding these individuals in these cities and in these local governments who want to drive change, and this public-private partnership could be a really critical part of that. And then the other ingredient is the public. As you say, right to clean, healthy environment is a human right. That is going to start resonating. Again, the regions I largely work in are young. This majority demographic are going to start, if they're already doing this, but increasingly more, demanding from their governments, demanding through the ways that they consume, demanding from exercising their citizenry and their civic duty by demanding that this right is exercised. So again, I think both the private sector can kind of leverage that and the public sector to say, if you feel like you're alone, you're not. And the really critical thing is finding that coalition that can bolster your efforts and help accelerate the change that you need.
Yes, thank you, Lou. That in nature is called cross-pollination. That's what we need more of. Okay, thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to take a few questions from the audience. If there's any questions, please state your name and organization. Let me know. Okay. Yeah. No? Yes?
Thank you. Hi. We're working on some city land regeneration projects in the UK right now. And one of the questions that corporates often ask us is, how do you measure the healthcare impacts of these projects, which are essentially nature-based projects, on people? And they're really kind of looking for some really strong measurable evidence of this. Now, obviously, anecdotally, we know that, nature is good for people. But I wondered if you could point to any specific evidence that I can share.
Let me start. I think one of the challenges on the evidence that we do have is very sort of macro level. So I think we've got these, we talk about that 100 billion number I said before. So I think at a macro level, we've got some modeling. I think what we need and what will help is how do you do that in a more localized environment? So you talk about infrastructure projects. I mean, we've just done some modeling on exactly that for a large infrastructure program, large road infrastructure program, and trying to quantify and understand both the risk and the benefit from a health perspective. So there are bespoke models out there. I think they're bespoke. So I think it's a great call that we need more toolage to allow that to happen at multiple levels.
I would thank you for pointing that out, because the commission I alluded to, the Pathfinders Commission, found exactly that, right? That there is some model data, but when you actually look at what the health co-benefits are of these interventions, we're not measuring it. And I always say people assume that health trickles down from good intentions. It doesn't. And if we actually, there's a potential for unintended impacts, and if we don't actually measure it, we don't know. One impact that I can share is, say, in the educational space. So we found, for example, links between air pollution exposure and concentration attention in children in a very short up and down space of time, so within very short-lived. So that's a huge aspect if you're talking about repeated episodes of air pollution events. An example, not specifically from air pollution, but a more systems approach looking at human settlements. There have been some research that looked at the impact of upgrading housing and human settlements developments in Wales, actually. And part of that is the air quality. Part of that was access to green space. Part of that was thermal comfort. And they found that over a 10-year period, the people that lived in those upgraded developments had a reduced hospitalizations, emergency hospitalizations, reduced by 40% over a 10-year period. 40. Now imagine if there's anyone from the pharmaceutical space here, if we had a pill to say we could reduce emergency hospital admissions by 40%, the queue would be out the door, would be all the way to Cairo. We have this information. We actually have this interventions, but it just shows the power of the data. So you're absolutely right. We need much more localized data.
Yes, over here. Okay.
Saurav Arunachalam, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, USA. Great panel, good discussion. Two questions. One for Tolu, I think. I was struck by your 3% comment of GDP reduction in Accra. Could you expand on that a little bit just to give some perspective of that number? And the second question is on the Alliance for Clean Air. What is the geographic scope of that alliance?
Sorry, did you say expand on what the causes of 3% are? There's two things. There is absenteeism and loss of productivity, and it is cost in terms of healthcare. So what you're actually paying as a result of illness, and it's cost in terms of productivity due to ill health and cost of healthcare. Has it rebounded? Well, have we tackled air pollution? Not yet. But this is the kind of thing that we can actually, it's the argument for saying if we can measure it now, and one of the key things that came from those studies is to show why we actually needed more measurement of air quality so that we can, in even a within city space, can we actually look at that texture of in spaces where we actually tackle air pollution, can we see noticeable changes? Like the example I gave with the US embassies, they found that they had significant reductions in their hazard pay to their staff in the cities where air pollution dropped. So if we have that kind of contextual data, say within districts, within a city, that could be quite powerful, nice natural experiments.
Andreas, do you want to take that second question on geographies in the alliance? Yes.
Sure thing. So currently, I mean, if we look into the existing members of the alliance, we have coverage in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Europe and North America as well. But I mean, the alliance is a global alliance, so we welcome any corporate member anywhere we are, because we need to address air pollution regardless where we are in the world.
Yes. Thank you. And then last question here.
Hi there. Kevin Hicks from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Great panel and inspiring. But perhaps a question to Andreas. You know, when you're building your network, what has been the key factors that have kind of persuaded people to take this up? I mean, we heard from Tahululu about that perhaps we need to raise awareness of the impacts, you know, like on children's cognitive development, which are really big, you know, a big emerging pieces of research that need to be spread about further, I think. But what are the key factors in your success so far?
I would say, but overall, I mean, if we're looking into the sustainability professionals today, I mean, we have a care for people and the planet. And the more you get aware of the impact of air pollution and the staggering figures that we see, the argument not to take action, I mean, there's none. I mean, you need to take this, it's our responsibility as well. So I think this is what people and companies would like to address as well. And if we can also do it in a simple way, so we can address both climate change and air pollution, which in itself are two human rights issues. I think that's really telling to people as well. And it also gets really close to the heart when we talk about health. I mean, climate can seem a bit vague, but I mean, this is about the air we breathe day in and day out. And we also know that the outdoor air pollution is what we also breathe indoor as well. So this is affecting all of us.
All right. Thank you, everyone who tuned in digitally and in person. Thank you to our incredible panelists, Rob, Tulu, Martina, Andreas. As we said before, we need cross-collaboration, cross-pollination. It's costing businesses $100 billion. Thank you, Rob. If you want to learn any more information, please look up the Clean Air Alliance Act, and you could also chat with anyone here from the World Economic Forum, and of course, any of our panelists. A big round of applause for everyone. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. Today is Biodiversity Day, so a perfect day to talk about the link between climate change and nature. So, hosted by the Swedish Pavilion, I'm here today with some colleagues to talk about that and how, especially at the corporate level, you can connect the action agendas, the nature agenda, and the climate agenda. But first of all, why are we talking about nature and climate together? We know that nature is impacted by climate change in an incredible way, but also the loss of biodiversity in nature impacts climate change, because the more we lose nature, especially deforestation and land degradation, the more impact we have on climate change. But if we turn this around, we can see that if we work with nature, protect nature, manage well our land, and restore nature, we can also contribute to climate by creating important mitigation outcomes. So I'm here today with I'm here today with Patricia Iglesias from the São Paulo Environment Agency. Welcome, Patricia. I'm here with Gilles Tisserand from Tetra Pak. Welcome, Gilles, and Alexander Schmidt from Normative, who is going to join us virtually. Hi, Alexander. Nice to see you on the screen. Excellent. So with these colleagues, we are really going to explore how do we connect agendas. We have companies and we have important stakeholders here that can talk about from different perspectives. So I'll start with a question for all of you, really about the interconnections. We see that, as I said, they're interconnected from the negative side, but they can also very much be interconnected from the positive side, the opportunity side. So from your perspective and from your position in the, you from government and business and research, what do you do to make this connection? I'll start with you, Patricia.
So hello everyone, it's very good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. What I can say is that CETESB, the environmental company of São Paulo, is one of the most important environmental agencies in Latin America. And we try to connect the license system with the protection of nature. We have this panel to talk about the connections we can have in nature-based solutions and also the license systems. We need to see that the point is not only avoid pollution, but we need to have a step more. We need to go under new steps to get these solutions. Talking a little bit about São Paulo, we have the most industrialized state in the country, in Brazil. Also one of the most populated, I can say the most populated in Brazil. And these characteristics present both challenges and opportunities for our state. And the environmental agents, I can say, has to be most attentive to attendance of normative limits of emissions to avoid pollution. But not only this. Usually, we need to have a kind of legislation that is more restricted than the federal level legislation, and that's the point for São Paulo, and I think this is a collaboration. And another point is that the license system can collaborate and connect climate change and nature-based solutions. So I can give you some examples. One of them is the monitoring of environmental quality in the state of São Paulo. So we have a lot of parks in the state of São Paulo with different types of landscapes, places with visitation and also ecosystems and ecotourism potential, and the concession of areas without full protection of the state. Because what we think nowadays is that the state can focus only in the protection of the nature, and the private sector can be in charge of the services for the population. And this is very, very good opportunity to work on this.
Thank you, Patricia. This is very interesting how you're managing very different resources because at the government level. Let's talk about from the corporate perspective. How do you connect the two agendas that have been traditionally seen as two separate agendas, separate teams and separate everything? So,
thank you, Julia. When it comes to Tetra Pak, I mean, what we need to remember is that eventually we have a presence in 160 countries worldwide. We are selling hundreds of billions of packagings and thousands of equipments on the ground. So when we think about our footprint, and I will think about the business footprint, we have to acknowledge that we have a great dependency on nature. So when it comes to Tetra Pak, it's about the raw material. So the paper board we buy from suppliers in Brazil, from suppliers in Sweden, it's important. And as we are providing solutions to the food industry players, we also have to realize that our customers, the food players, are also heavily dependent on nature. So that's a starting point that I wanted to make, because the in a way, resilience of Tetra Pak as a company and the food system is based on the resilience of nature. And as you've outlined, Patricia, there's a clear link that I think nobody can challenge about climate having a negative impact on nature, and nature being the ally to fight the effects of climate change. So when I look at how we've been driving that joint agenda, the first point is that we have to also realize that we indeed have in the past driven two separate agendas. A strong climate one, where for years now we have heavily pushed our climate reduction across the value chain. So typically minus 70% reduction of the greenhouse gas footprint in our operations in 10 years, minus 20% across the value chain, working with suppliers in Brazil, in Sweden, to really work into the reduction of the climate footprint. On the other side, we have also strengthened the leg around biodiversity protection, nature protection. Let it be through certification, let it be through traceability in the value chain. Now, the job that we are doing is really combining those two agendas together, because they make sense, because we can have a positive impact again on our climate footprint through working on nature conservation. And that's the reason why we have recently launched a land restoration program in Brazil, in the Atlantic forest, with the aim to restore 7,000 hectares of this Atlantic forest, and that will give us very positive output on climate, on local biodiversity, on the social communities. So that's the way clearly forward. There are obviously many challenges when it comes to how to measure biodiversity, how to measure nature. It's less easy than measuring climate impact, and that's also something that we have to keep in mind when we build this joint approach.
I will ask you about that, don't worry. But before we move to actually tracking and measuring, which is key, is at the core of integrity for sure. But I just wanted to also ask Alex to tell me a little bit about, from normative perspective, how do you connect climate and nature? And then we move on to actually, while you start with that question, then you can also then tell us a little bit about the reporting, the measurement and the reporting. So 2 questions for one.
Like it. That's great. So first of all, also from my side, thank you for having me now here remotely. Really happy to join and share a bit our perspective. So just to emphasize a point that has already been made before briefly. So there is a direct link. I mean, climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. Like that is a fact. And in turn, and that has just been said before, but again, just to stress this point, the destruction of ecosystems through climate change in turn limits, of course, the ability of nature to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So we can get into this like vicious cycle of damaging the ecosystem, lowering biodiversity, and in turn then kind of hampering our own progress to kind of reduce emissions to begin with. So what we at Normative do is on the, if you look at this from like a bathtub perspective, like we try to turn off the inflow of water. We try to turn off the the tap, so to speak. So we help companies to accurately measure and then subsequently reduce their carbon footprint. And by that, we of course help to preserve the biodiversity and the ecosystems that then in turn can help us to further reduce and further sink carbon into the most natural ways. So that's kind of the perspective that we take on the two. So there's a direct link, and we help kind of on the top of the whole funnel, if you want, to help companies to actually limit the impact, the negative impact on biodiversity.
Thank you, Alexander. So I like to go back to how, from a corporate perspective, what is your experience about measuring and reporting as well the link, the impacts of your efforts, and especially efforts related to nature and climate?
So at Tetra Pak, as I've said, we've been engaged in the protection of forests now for a while, and it all started with lots of activities around voluntary certifications. So typically we have pushed all our suppliers to have traceability, to have FSC chain of custody in their value chain, which enable us to in a way guarantee no deforestation, to guarantee traceability. So that was the starting point of the way we measured impacts on land more than nature. Now that we are moving to the next phase, which is acknowledging that, first of all, nature goes beyond land protection per se, but we need also to move forward towards restoration, so beyond the no harm. We are starting to touch all the questions that we've had in climate maybe 30 years ago on how to measure. And again, I think when we look at the climate journey, well, a greenhouse gas is a greenhouse gas, right? So you have CO2, you have methane, and the impact that you have in your factories in Sao Paulo region, or in my factory that I have in France, you will experience the effects of greenhouse gas in China. When it comes to biodiversity, it's more complex, right? Because we are talking about local impact and potentially local KPIs. So measuring the health of an ecosystem, there's no one single standard today. So the health of a Nordic forest is different from the health from Brazilian forest. And I think we need to acknowledge again that complexity. Now, this being said, as a company, Tetra Pak is engaged with SBTN, Science-Based Target for Nature, and they have a corporate engagement program where we are exactly right now discussing about the way to measure. I know that the WBCSD is taking on that discussion on how to come up with the right KPIs to measure nature projects. So the way we are working right now at Tetra Pak is really framing the two legs that are climate and biodiversity nature KPIs, and find commonalities between the two. So we will have joint KPIs on CO2 improvement, and that's a global KPI, and then localized KPIs per regions, because again, we need to have in mind that biodiversity is different from an area to another.
Sorry, Patricia, this reminds me a question about KPIs and, you're measuring climate biodiversity, which is the topic of today. I assume you're also looking at impacts on local communities, and just give me a second, your views on the connection between local communities and nature. Sorry, I know I'm adding a little bit to the conversation, but I think it's also important to make sure that when we say biodiversity, we also talk about the landowners and the communities and indigenous peoples that are part of the land. But how do you actually how much interaction in these projects do you have?
Yeah. So by the way, building on your questions, what I want to say is that I really appreciate the way COP27 has been built, because we are really looking into what climate change is about, and climate change is not about climate only, it's about impact on the food system, on communities, on social justice. And I think for the first time at COP, I really see that depth of discussion around the impact and interconnection of all the topics together. So yes, when we look into driving the sustainability agenda at Tetra Pak, we are looking beyond climate and biodiversity biodiversity. We are looking into integrated social justice to look into how to integrate local communities into the activities we do. Now, first disclaimer, Tetra Pak, we do not own forests, right? So we are working with suppliers, Klabin in Brazil, Stora Enso, Bitteroods for the Swedish people here in the round. So we are working with them to assess their impact on local communities and make sure that they actually improve the local impact. I've mentioned the land restoration program we started in Brazil, in the Atlantic forest, where clearly we are actually dependent on landowners, and we know that by working on the restoration, there will be positive impacts on the local communities. And well, we know we will have to measure it, and that's actually part of the program KPIs. It's not only about number of hectares that we will restore, it's about also the quality of life, the income of the region. So that's part of the KPI, and I'm sure that Patricia has a lot to say on the impact on communities.
Exactly, Patricia. The question is, I'm not going to ask you all the KPIs that you guys use, because I'm sure there are plenty and they're of really high quality, but it's more about how do you use the KPIs in getting the policy, to get buy-in into the policy and to get the support from your constituency. So what is the important, also political element of the KPIs?
Yes, what is interesting is that the reality in Brazil, it's quite different from the developed countries. So you have the problem of energy, the use of energy, but in Brazil, we have the problem of the use of land. That's why we need to work in the nature-based solutions. And then we try to connect this not only with the license system, but also with not only a command and control systems, but voluntary agreements with the private sector. So one program we have in the state of São Paulo that named Nascentes, started to get with the private sector the possibility of compensation and restoration of areas connected. Landowners that had to recover the areas and companies that need to do the compensation. And with these projects, they could be together and do the compensation in the area of that owners. And with this program, in 4 years, we could recover more than 48 million planted. So it was hectares. So it was a lot for the state of São Paulo. And it's important to say that in São Paulo we have the Atlantic forest. It's different from Amazon, but it's very important. It's a biome from Brazil also, a protected area also. And we don't have the problem of deforestation we have in Amazon. It's quite different. And we don't have also the burn problem we have in Amazon nowadays. So the idea is to connect with the private sector and give support for them to choose areas that they can work in nature-based solutions, because this is not the main street work of the company. The company is like Tetra Pak, is working in another point. So we help to find these areas and connect the private company with some owner that need to recover an area. And this is a good way to recover areas in the state, I think. And looking for Tetra Pak, what I can say is that we are working a lot in reverse logistics also in the state. So in the packaging system, you can recover this, and we connect this with the license system also. So the companies cannot get the license in the state if they don't do the reverse logistics. And it's a quite good way to get the companies in this agenda, because 4 years ago we had almost 2,000 companies in this agenda, and now we have more than 7,000 companies working in this agenda. So in my experience as a CEO of the company is that we can connect with the private sector, not only with this command and control, giving multas, tax, but giving some opportunities to the companies.
Patricia, this is great because you are, getting into the next question, which is about what are the measures that you use to leverage, right, to incentivize. So on this, let me ask Alexander, from your perspective, you do more the infrastructure for measurement and helping then service providers, but what would be for you the ideal leverage system to get people to be aligned in a system of measuring and reporting?
Yeah, a very, very good question. And I agree with what has been said before around measurement, and data is key. If you have not measured both, of course, your own emissions, but then also impact you have, or maybe positive impact you can have through activities that we just heard around reforestation, for example, if you have not measured that, you can, of course, not take informed action, actually manage then your whole carbon footprint or carbon management, if we talk a bit more broadly. So the way that we, of course, work with our customers, I had before this like bathtub example. So both sides, I think, are important. One side is like getting the water out of it, meaning stopping the overflow, helping the ecosystem to be able to absorb more greenhouse gases. So that is on that side, we call this then carbon investments. So that we help customers, of course, to accurately also screen what would be carbon removal options that actually help to remove carbon permanently with the right additionality without leakage. So these kind of criteria to help them to assess high quality investments. At the same time, what we always say is do not try to ignore or you have to also check out the part around inflow of emissions. So if you're only busy, getting the water with a small bucket out of the bathtub, but it still keeps flowing into it, you will be just, pushing the boulder up the hill, but it will roll down when you reach the top again. So we really encourage companies to first look at how can you reduce across your entire value chain the outflow or the inflow, in that sense, in a bathtub example, the inflow of emissions, and then at the same time, of course, looking in how can you help to actively restore the ecosystem. But for both sides, and that's so crucial, measurement really is important. Data and information is crucial. And if you do not get this right, and we see many, many companies, unfortunately, carving out a large part of their footprint or of emissions that they are accountable for, they fail to measure these, they fail to capture these. And if you do that, then of course it's many other efforts might be a bit less fruitful because you will keep filling up this bathtub with more and more emissions. So you have to actually tackle your carbon accounting from kind of like both sides of it.
Thank you, Alexander. So, and let's ask then Gilles, from the company perspective, especially given that the value chain is long and complex, but what are the practical measures that you have put in place? I mean, you were talking about certification, and we know that it doesn't happen overnight to get all your suppliers certified and everything. Give us a sense of the effort and the specific actions that you have put in place to get your suppliers on board, because I think there is a lot to learn for a lot of other companies that are grappling with this problem. Bring in Scope 3, the famous Scope 3. How do we do this in a way that is successful, also economically, from the suppliers, because we don't want to leave anybody behind. So, yeah.
So, if, again, I look at Tetra Pak footprint, let me start by climate. Scope 3 upstream, which basically means the materials we buy, and that's pretty much 99% is linked to the raw materials we buy, paper, board, plastics, aluminium. That part represents now 37% of the total footprint of Tetra Pak. And we have managed to decrease the absolute greenhouse gas footprint of that area as well as the percentage. So that's on climate, 37%. Now, if I look at the land-related impact, which is a good proxy for the nature/biodiversity impact, this upstream part represents 99.9% of my impact because it's so wide, so huge in terms of size and volumes that obviously any activities that we have to do related to nature, biodiversity will be linked to land. So the way we have pushed that nature and climate agenda combined together with our suppliers is, if I go back in time, I think maybe 10 years ago, it was very much as a supply-buyer relationship. So Tetra Pak was and is strong, so we were in a pretty good position to push them to take actions and reduce. So we were talking to our partners, the Clavin and the Solar Enso, telling you guys need to reduce. Well, that's not the way to work, actually. And we have seen that by changing our collaboration style, moving from a supply-buyer relationship, very vertical, and moving to a new way of working, which is all about collaboration, we have managed to multiply the effect and the impact. So we are actually right now working with the top 20 suppliers we have in our value chain, and those top 20 suppliers represent 92% of our raw materials footprint. So it's quite, in a way, condensed. And we have created a partnership platform called Join Us in Protecting the Planet, where we are working together. So I have paperboard suppliers from Brazil sitting with paperboard suppliers in Sweden, and we are discussing together on how to improve production. And it's the same with aluminum suppliers and plastic suppliers. So moving towards that collaboration style has changed the dynamics and has increased the impact. So that's not exactly your questions, but I wanted to make a clear point about collaboration being key, even between the private sectors area. Now, if we go into the details, within that Join Us in Protecting the Planet platform, we still have actually put targets to all of our suppliers. So we have asked them to report to CDP, Carbon Disclosure Program, when it comes to forest, when it comes to climate. And we will soon do the same on water at a time where Tetra Pak will also report to CDP Water. We have asked them to have SBTI targets when it comes to verify the climate targets, because that's the way to have a common language and objectives. So we are aligning KPIs when it comes to climate, when it comes to water, when it comes to the target, but also the reporting, so that we can have a common language and, again, talking about collaboration, working together. And it has shown successful. Again, in 2 years, we have managed to reduce the climate footprint of that supply base by close to 15%. So learning from one to another, and that's just fantastic success.
Yeah. No, and you actually stole my thunder, because I had a question about collaboration and coalitions that are very also close to my heart. You know, well, I'm a true believer in coalitions and working together. So Patricia, what is your, because I think a lot of coalitions, there are coalitions that are single stakeholder, but there is also the multi-stakeholder approach. So what is your experience in your region?
Yes, Julia, I really believe on that. In my opinion, this is the way to get the solutions, not only for climate change, but for our agenda in environmental protection. So as a subnational government, 3 years ago, we decided to have in São Paulo environmental agreement, like Paris Agreement, but playing this role in the state of São Paulo. So how the state, how the region could help the companies in our state to go in this agenda. And then we started this kind of coalition with 55 companies in the state just helping them in a voluntary agenda. I have to say that's not connected with the license system, but the idea was to help the companies to get away in the climate change. So what they were doing and how we could help. We started a climate change chamber inside the company and put big companies like Tetra Pak and another small companies together because they could have the same experience and one could help the other. But what I can say now is that in 3 years we could grow from 55 companies to 1,600, more than 1,600 companies in the state of São Paulo. And now we have also observers like UNEP that is an observer in this agreement from São Paulo. So we need to connect. When we talk about SDGs and SDG 17, I really believe on that. We need to connect the private sector, the public sector, the academia. I'm also a professor in the University of São Paulo, and we need to put the students working in real projects that the companies need, not only working in theory, not only projects in theory. I'm in charge of the environmental area in our university, and now we have some projects that put these PhD students just working in real projects to help the private sector, to help the public policies. And I think this is the only way we can go in the climate change agenda, and we can get the targets from Paris Agreement, in my opinion.
Thank you, Patricia. This is really inspiring because you're talking about, creating a coalition, but you also mentioned youth in the same time. So how do you bring the new generations at the table and be part of the solution, which is so important, and give them an opportunity also to learn? So now we are almost about to close, but we are also recognizing that in a month's time, many of us will be on another COP, which is the COP15 on the climate, the biodiversity COP, the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is going to discuss a very important issue, like how do we set this global target, the equivalent to the 1.5, right? So this really needs to be supported. What would be your message if you were to put a message in the bottle today to, go all the way to Montreal? Let's start with Alexander. From your perspective of more the science, the measurements, what is, some practical suggestions for the negotiator that will meet in Montreal?
Very good question. I think the main theme for me is really that we emphasize the interconnectedness between what we just discussed, the different systems here. So we have biodiversity and, of course, climate change. So we don't just try to isolate the two and look at them in succession, but we actually draw the line between them. So you cannot enhance biodiversity while you continue to pollute. That was kind of what I tried to make earlier, the point that we do encourage our customers, our clients, our partners, of course, to invest in solutions that actually help the ecosystem. At the same time, we also know that if you do not start to reconfigure your own value chain to be less of a contributor to climate change, other efforts might just be a bit, window dressing, so to speak. So I think the interconnectedness is something we have to keep in mind. And then the encouraging message that I would like to give leaders and corporate leaders, but also policy leaders on the way is that we do see the commitment gap in the corporate sector narrowing significantly. So we have more and more companies that commit to net zero. And as we just said, through connections there, net zero emissions also means I will have a less harmful effect on the ecosystem. So with this commitment gap closing, now it's really about taking the right action, both what we heard here around ecosystem and biodiversity, but especially also about accurate assessment of your impact. Accurate for us, it's mostly carbon accounting then, and then taking informed action on basis of these high-level, high-detailed measurements, to then actually follow through with your commitments that you have already put out there.
Thank you, Alexander. So over to you, Gilles. Your expectations from the negotiators.
I'm conscious of time and I could say a lot, but what I would like to say is that our expectation at Tetra Pak is, and I will think about business, not state level, but we are expecting the negotiators, we are expecting all countries actually to push for mandatory requirements on reporting, on disclosing when it comes to biodiversity impact. And as I've said, it's not easy, there's no one single KPI, but let's look into putting a mandatory disclosing and reporting for all large multinationals. Tetra Pak is a large multinational with a very complex value chains, but we are ready to take our part, and we believe that by moving on with such type of reporting, it will enable to know where we are, know where we want to get, and we've discussed about collaboration, then find the means to halt the biodiversity loss and move towards restoration and a positive movement towards nature positive.
Thank you, Gilles. And so for you, Patricia, you might be one of the negotiators probably, but what do you expect from that is going to happen? I mean, we have been waiting for a few years now for this meeting to happen.
Yes, I'm not a negotiator, but what I can say is that, in my opinion, it's a little different than what you said. I think we are not in the time of the law, because we have a law for a long time. Like in Brazil, our constitution tells us that we have a right to an environmental, equilibrated, balanced environment. But we couldn't implement this. So in my opinion, we are now in the point of the policies and implementation of policies. That's why I think we have to connect these different stakeholders. And the point for this COP of biodiversity is really how we can connect this, how we can put these people working together, how we can put the private, and I think the private sector will be very important on that, because we need the finance to get the conditions. We have the science knowledge, and we know we cannot go further. Then it's a matter of life. Not only our life, but the future generations' life. That's why we cannot fail in this COP15. And the idea is that we really need to get the implementation now. So that's the point.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Patricia. And the hope from my side is that the negotiator will listen to the messages coming from business. There is a huge business coalition, Business for Nature, that is really bringing this point. And it's really about making sure that the governments really stand up for the promises of setting a target that is meaningful, that really will help us turn the curve and recover nature. And I would also say, make sure that you make the connection between nature and climate. These are not two different agendas, maybe are different two sides, but it's the same coin. And we need the resources of both, and we need to make that connection. So from my perspective, I would like very much to thank also the Swedish Pavilion for the hospitality, for letting us have this really valuable conversation about connecting nature and climate, but also the different stakeholders, the science, the business, and the policymakers on making a difference on how we can survive on this planet. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to the audience.